Hello. We will go over some topics for task math problems using worksheet number 8 as an example. We'll start with factoring. Now, factoring, you're looking for multiples to give an expression or a number. Now, the expression could be a polynomial or it could be a square root. And I have some examples here of numbers. Notice 35. What are the multiples in the number 35? That means numbers that can be multiplied to give 35. 7 and 5 are factors of 35 because they multiply to give 35. Right here. Look at 20. 20 multiples or the factors are 4 and 5, also 10 and 2, because both of those sets of numbers multiply to give 20. 4 times 5 is equal to 20. 10 times 2 is 20. Now look at the number 100. We listed multiples 4 and 25, 2 and 50, and 10 and 10. Each of those sets of numbers multiply to give 100. 4 times 25 is 100. 2 times 50 is 100. And 10 times 10 is 100. Not only can you have factors of numbers, but you can have factors of square roots. Let's look at this example. Square root of 30. What are the factors of 30? Well, 10 and 3 are factors. Of course, there's some others, but we are only listing these. 10 times 3 is 30, so you can factor it into two square roots, 10 and 30. Now, let's look at the square root of 44. What two numbers multiply to give 44? Well, an example is 4 times 11. So that square root can be factored into the square root of 4 and the square root of 11. But 4 is a perfect square, square root being equal to 2. So square root of 4 equal 2. So the square root of 44 can be written as 2, which is the square root of 4, times the square root of 11, which is quite similar to the problem you had on worksheet number 8. Now, remember, when you factor a square root, you try to find factors that are perfect squares. And I gave you some examples of them. 4, square root of 2 is 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, square root of 49 is 7, 84, 64, 81, square root of 81 is 9, and 100, square root of 100 is 10, and there are others. Now, you can also factor polynomial expressions. Now, what are the factors of this expression? X squared plus 6x plus 8. Now, what you're looking for are two expressions that you can multiply to give this x squared plus 6x plus 8. Now, we know that x will be part of each of the factors because x times x is x squared. But what we need to do is find the other two numbers that are here represented by these question marks. So let's find out what do we substitute for the question marks. Now, when the coefficient of the variable here, when it's just 1, like here it's just 1, even though we don't have to put 1, the values to complete the factors, it has to be, in the case of this, x squared plus 6x plus 8. It must be two numbers that multiply to give you 8, and those same two numbers must add to give you 6. Now, can you think of two numbers which adds to give you 6 and multiply to give you 8? Okay, Those numbers are what? Those numbers are 4 and 2, because 4 and 2 multiply to give you 8, and 4 plus 2 adds to give you 6. So now we know what goes in these question marks: x plus 4 and x plus 2. Now you can check it. You can multiply x plus 4 times x plus 2, and you should get back this expression. All right, try it. Now, let's take another one. What are the factors of x squared minus 4x minus 21? Now, what two numbers multiply to give you a negative 21? And those two numbers will add to give you a negative 4. Now, you have to remember your law of signs. Unlike signs, you subtract, keep the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. Absolute value means it doesn't have a sign. Now, like signs, you just add the numbers. Minus, minus gives minus, plus, plus gives plus. And we have the multiplication rules over here. When you multiply unlike signs, you get negative. When you multiply like signs, you get positive. So plus times plus is plus. Negative times negative is plus. Now, what two numbers can you multiply to get a negative 21? Those numbers are minus 7 and a plus 3. Unlike signs, multiply to give you negative. Now, take those same two numbers and add them. Minus 7 plus 3 gives you a negative 4, because you subtract the 3 from the 7 and you get 4, and the sign would be that of the number with the greater absolute value, which is the 7. Or another way of looking at this, if you have more negative than you do positive, then your answer must be negative. And you do. You have more negatives in the 7 than you do positives in the 3. So the factors of that polynomial expression are x minus 7 and x plus 3. Now, on your task reference sheet that I want you to look at, you get a chance, it has a special factoring section that you should be familiar with. So look at that section and then plug some numbers in and try it, all right? Now, as always, if you have any questions on anything that we go over and you need further explanation, you can call and we can go one-on-one and explain it even further. Okay, let's look at exponents. You had a problem on exponents. Now, we won't list all the rules, and there are several of them. We just will list some basic rules and some main ideas. Now, what is an exponent? Sometimes we call it a power. How many times you use to multiply a number in a multiplication. If you say x squared, that means x times x. A negative exponent means you divide, because the opposite of multiplying is dividing. We'll look at some examples. A fractional exponent like 1 over n means take the nth root. So this radical that has x inside and the n here means x raised to the 1 over n power. Now, let's look at our basic rules. The product rule. If you multiply in two terms with the same base, and here the base is x, you add the exponent. So x to the third times x to the 8 is x to the 3 plus 8, which gives you 11. That's the product rule. Now, the power rule. If you have a second exponent in the expression, in other words, you have an exponent in the parentheses, and outside the parentheses, another exponent. The rule is you multiply the outer and the inner exponents. So that means x to the 5th, all raised to the 3rd power, will be 5 times 3, or x to the 15. Even if you had more than one variable, it works. If you had x to the second, y to the third, all raised to the power of 5, 5 times 2 is 10, and 5 times 3 is 15. Now, let's look at the quotient rule. X to the 14 here, and this is divided by x to the 6. Now, when you're dividing, you subtract the exponent. So the answer will be x to the 14th minus 6. 14 minus 6, and you get x to the 8. Now, the thing to remember, whenever you raise anything to the power, whether it's a variable or number, the value is 1. So if it has an exponent of 0, the answer is 1. That means x to the 0 is 1, 5 to the 0 is 1. Okay? Now, about fractional exponents, and I gave you some examples here. You have inside the radical, you have the power that the variable or number is raised to, and then outside you have the root of the number. Okay, so this is x to the m and then the root of n. So x to the 2/3, that number that's there in the numerator is within the radical, that's the power, and outside is the number that's in the denominator. Okay. Now, let's take an example using exponents. Some more examples. X to the 8th raised to the 7th power. Multiply the power outside by the power inside. 7 times 8, 56. X to the minus 7, x to the 9. Now, x to the minus 7 is really 1 over x to the positive 7. So you have a division. X to the 9 divided by x to the 7th is equal 9 minus 7, or x to the 2nd power. Here we have a coefficient of 6 times x squared times y to the 3rd power, and this whole expression is raised to the 3rd power. That means everything within this parenthesis get raised to that power. So that's 6 to the 3rd times x to the 2nd, y to the 3rd, all raised to the 3rd power. And remember, we said we multiply the exponent outside by the exponents inside. So 6 to the 3rd power is 216. X to the 2nd times 3 is x to the 6th. Y to the 3rd times 3 is y to the 9th. Just remember, if you have a coefficient, you have to raise that coefficient to the power that's outside the parentheses. All right, now let's go to our next topic, calculating the slope and the equation of a line, and also write an equation in slope-intercept format. That is, you writing as y equal mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. Now, first let's calculate the slope. Now, we've said that slope is the difference in the y values divided by the difference in the x values. Now, whenever you're given points, the x value comes first. That means x here is 10, y is minus 9. X is 7, y is a plus 6. Now, just to keep track of things, it's nice to just label the pairs. So we'll call this 10 x2 and this minus 9 y2. Then we'll call this 7 x1 and this 6 y1. Doesn't matter how you label them. You could have called this one x1, y1. They're pairs. Never mix them up now. And this could have been x2, y2. Okay, now let's calculate the slope both ways. Look at what we did here. Okay, we take this one. Okay, y2 is minus 9. y1 is plus 6. So minus 9 minus 6 are the difference in the y. Then we take the x, which is 10 for x2 and 7 for x1, 10 minus 7. So minus 9 minus 6 gives you a minus 15. 10 minus 7 gives you 3. Minus 15 divided by 3. Remember, when you're dividing by unlike signs, you get negative, so you get minus 5. You also could have done it the other way. You could have said the y is 6. Right here is 6. Minus a minus 9. And the x is 7 minus 10, which is what we have here. 6 minus a minus 9 is really 6 plus 9, which is plus 15. 7 minus 10, subtract, minus 3. 15 divided by minus 3 is minus 5. So that's how you find slope. And since we know slope is rise over run, and rise up are your y values in the numerator, and run across are your x values in the denominator. Now, let's go to how do we find the equation of a line if we have the slope and 1 point on the line. Look at what we have here. The slope is a -5. The point on the line is 2, -4. That means x is 2, y is a -4. Now, our slope-intercept equation is y equal mx plus b. M is the slope, b is the y-intercept. And our point is x is 2 and y is -4. Now, we can write our slope-intercept equation. We know what the slope is, so y equal mx plus b. We put our slope, -5x plus b. Now, how do we find x? How do we find b, actually the slope-intercept? Well, we were given an x value and a y value. So we can plug those in. -4 is the y, and 2 is the x. So if we plug those in, we only have the one unknown, and that's b, the y-intercept. -4 equal -5 times 2 is a -10. And so b is going to be, let's add 10 to both sides of the equation. And we get -4 to +10, b is 6. Now we substitute those values in the equation. Y equal -5, which is the slope, x, plus 6, which is the y-intercept. That's how you solve the equation when you know the slope and you know 1 point, because you only need an x and a y value and the slope to find the slope-intercept equation. Now let's look at the third thing we want to do. Given an equation that's not in the y equal mx plus b format, we want to convert it to the y equal mx plus b format. So here we have 2y equal 4x plus 8. Now this one, if you divide both sides of the equation by 2, you'll get y on the left side. 4x divided by 2 is 2x. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Now you have it in the format of y equal m, which is 2, the slope, plus b, the y-intercept. Okay? So when you're looking at these kind of equations, look at how you can simplify the equation. In this one, you see that 2 can be divided in each of these coefficients. 2 divided by 2, 4 divided by 2, 8 divided by 2. Look for those kind of things to make your work simpler. Now, let's go to the next one, and you had this on your worksheet 8, where I gave you some polynomials. I gave you polynomials for your area and for your width, and you were to find the length. So the area was 4x squared plus 6x plus 2. The width is x plus 1. Okay, now you're to find the length. Now we know the area of a rectangle is equal to length times the width. So we can substitute area and width. The area we were given, 4x squared plus 6x plus 2. Okay, length, the width was given as x plus 1. Now we go back to our factoring. We want to factor this equation, but let's simplify it. Now we see 4 can be divided by 2, 6 can be divided by 2, and 2 can be divided by 2, giving us 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. Okay, now, so what are the factors? Well, we know we have 2x and we'll have x, because that's give us 2x squared, all right? But let's find out what are the other ones. Now, we want something that adds the 3x, but if we put 1 in and we multiply 1 times x, we get 1x, and 2x times 1 is 2x, and that adds the 3x. And the 1 gives you the constant. 1 times 1 gives you the constant. So we have 2x plus 1 times x plus 1 are the factors. Now, suppose you want to check them. You can use what we call FOIL. F is the first expression, O is the second, the O is the outer, and I is the inner, and L is the last. Now let's look at what we have here. First would be 2x and x, all right? O would be, the outer would be the 2x and the 1. And then L, the last, would be the 1 and the 1, okay? The inner would be these two, 1 and x. Now put them over here. F times F, the first will be 2x times x is 2x squared. The outer, which are the 2x and the 1, will be 2x times 1 is 2x. The inner will be 1 times x, which gives you 1x, that's inner. And then the last, L, would be 1 times 1. Now notice you have 2x squared, 2x plus 1 gives you 3x, and then you have 1 as the constant, which exactly matches this polynomial, 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. All right? Now, we factor, we have here, the factors we put in here, and it's solve for the length. Okay, so there are the factors, 2x plus 1, x plus 1, length times x plus 1. Now, if we divide both sides of the equation by x plus 1, remember this is the width, x plus 1, and we're looking for the length. Now notice x plus 1 cancels here. And we have 2x plus 1 equal length. This cancels to 1, so that's length. This cancels to 1. And so we have left 2x plus 1 is equal to the length of the rectangle. Okay, one of your problems required you to understand the number line. You were given some temperatures and you were to find the ones that are colder. Now, look at this number line. Okay, look at the number line here. As you go from left to right, you have increasing. As you go from right to left, decreasing. That means -6 is greater than a -7. -5 is greater than a -10. Okay? 4 is greater than a -7. All right? Now, we had Vermont has a temperature of a minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, what temperatures are colder? The temperatures, and I gave you choices here, minus 10, minus 16, 0, minus 18. Now, the colder temperatures would be the ones with absolute values greater than the 12. And what are those? 16 and 18. Minus 16 is colder than a minus 12. Minus 18 is colder than a minus 12. 0 is not, because remember let's go back to the number line, 0. At the left here, you have negative. At the right, you have positive. So 0 is actually warmer, say, than these negative ones, all right? But it would be colder than these positive ones, okay? So understand the number line. So even though the number may be negative and larger, it's actually smaller. So minus 10 is smaller than a minus 7, all right? Now let's go to finding unit price and unit rate. Unit price is the cost per unit of the item. Now that unit could be in ounces, it could be in pounds, it could be number of items, okay? But to solve it, you must be given an amount and what it is equivalent to. For example here, 12 ounces of soup costs $2.40. What would be the price of 1 ounce? You take the amount, 240, divided by 12, and you get the unit price of 20 cents per ounce. All right? Now, we have an example here. Fast food restaurant. 7 boxes of chicken nuggets for $25.90. 3 boxes of chicken fingers for $11.07. Now, to get the unit price, you divide the cost of the 7 boxes by 7. For the chicken nuggets, that gives you $3.70 for 1 box. For the chicken fingers, you were given $11.07 for 3 boxes. So divide the $11.07 by 3, and you get $3.69. Now, which food has the higher unit price? The 370, because it's greater than the 369. So the chicken nuggets has the higher unit price. All right. Now let's look at applying this for, say, travel. We have a train travels from Chicago, Illinois to Los Angeles in 1 day and 15 minutes. The distance between the cities is 2,115.3 miles. How fast was the train going on the average? In other words, how many miles per hour? So 1 day is 24 hours. 15 minutes is 15 over 60, because 60 minutes is 1 hour. So 15 over 60 is 1/4 hour, 1/4. So 1 day and 15 minutes equal, converting that 1/4 to a decimal, we get 0.25, 24.25 miles. So to find the miles per hour this train is traveling, you divide the number of miles, 2,015.3 miles, divided by the number of hours, 24.25 hours, would give you 83.11 miles per hour. So that would be how fast the train was going on an average. Another one of the problems you had on number 8 worksheet was finding profit. Now, profit is, to find profit, you have to know how much something costs, and you have to know what you're selling it for. And the difference gives you the profit. So the cost function, total cost of making C of X, total cost of making X items, all right? The revenue is the income. That's the price times the number sold. That's the price you're selling it the item at times the number of items you sold. And the profit is what is left over from the revenue, the income, after the costs have been subtracted. Right here, profit of X items would be the revenue of X items minus the cost of X items. Now, when the total revenue equals the total cost, we call that a break-even point. Now, let's take an example. We have a college newspaper, costs $70 production cost, that's fixed. And the margin of printing distribution costs are 40 cents a copy. And the selling price is 50 cents a copy. Now we want to write down these, the cost, the revenue, and the profit functions. What profit we get when we sell 500 copies, and how many copies should be sold to break even. So let's just take a look at this. So the marginal cost is 40 cents a copy. The fixed cost of $70. So here's our function. Cost function, 40 cents times X, the number of copies, plus 70 for the cost. 70 is the fixed cost. Now, if we sell the newspapers for 50 cents per copy. So the revenue is 50 cents times the number of copies sold. Now, profit is revenue, which is 0.50x, minus the cost here, which is 0.40x plus 70. So we just substituted cost and revenue in this profit formula. Now, 0.50x minus 0.40x is 0.10x. So the profit is 0.10x minus 70. Now, if we sell 500 copies, for the X we put 500. So 0.1 times 500 is 50. 50 minus 70 gives you a minus 20. That means we lost $20 from selling 500 copies. Now, the break-even point, we want to set our profit equal to 0. So we know what our profit is, 0.10x, right here, minus 70. Add 70 to both sides, we get 0.10x is 70. Divide both sides by 0.10, we get 700. So that means you must sell 700 copies to break even. So make sure you go through this in detail and understand how you find profit. Profit is revenue minus the cost of making something. What you make of what it costs you to make that item.